Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging headfirst into something huge happening right here in Washington, D.C.
That's right. We're talking about the U.S. Army's 250th birthday celebration.
And specifically, that massive military parade that's the centerpiece.
Exactly. Big event.
So our mission, as always, is to take all the sources you've shared, the articles, the reports, that historical context, and really, cut through the noise.
Get to the heart of it.
Yeah, extract the key stuff so you can understand the sheer scale, what it actually involves on the ground, and all the different conversations happening around it.
There are definitely a lot of different takes on this one.
Absolutely. We'll cover the logistics, which are just incredible, the security, which is massive, then step back for some history on military parades.
And then dive into the why, the purpose, the cost, the optics, all those different perspectives.
The sources really give us a lot to unpack there.
They do. It's not just the what, but really it matters. The history, the current context, it's all in there.
Okay, let's start with that grand scale then, because, wow, based on the reading, this is enormous. Over 6,000 soldiers.
Yeah. 6,000 troops marching down Constitution Avenue. That's a significant number.
And it's way more than just people marching, right? The sources detail a lot of hardware.
Oh, yeah. 150 military vehicles. That's a lot of machinery.
Heavy stuff, too, like 70-ton Abrams tanks,
Yeah.
but also historical ones like M4 Shermans.
Exactly. Seems like a mix showcasing modern capability alongside, the Army's history.
And it's not just on the ground. There's an air component.
Right. Helicopters, Blackhawks, Apaches, Chinooks are mentioned, plus those historical flyovers.
Like the World War II planes, B-17s, C-47s.
E-51 Mustangs, yeah. So a full air and ground show.
And the route is right down Constitution Avenue from 23rd Street to 15th, kicking off at 6:30 in the evening.
And just making that happen requires some serious prep work. The physical setup is huge.
I saw the numbers, 19 miles of barricades.
19 miles. Plus 17 miles of those concrete sort of bike rack style barriers, and 175 magnetometers for screening people.
That paints a picture. And with vehicles like Abrams tanks, what about the roads?
Good point. The sources say the Army pledged to cover any damage. They've apparently been putting down big metal plates, especially at intersections, to protect the pavement.
Makes sense. So it's not just the parade, though. It's part of a bigger celebration day.
Yeah, exactly. There's an all-day Army birthday festival on the National Mall from like 11 a.m. to 6 p.m.
What does that involve?
Demonstrations, equipment displays you can get up close, apparently music, food trucks, the works. And the day actually started much earlier.
Oh, right, the Arlington ceremony.
Yeah, a wreath laying at Arlington National Cemetery around 8:15 in the morning. So a full day of events.
Okay, so all this activity right in the heart of D.C. has got to mean major disruptions.
Yeah, absolutely. The sources flag major traffic issues, parking restrictions everywhere, and just huge crowds expected.
And air travel, too, right? Reagan National is right there.
Yep. The FAA restricted airspace around Reagan during the flyovers and fireworks. That definitely impacts flights. Metro's running, apparently.
But with more police.
Yeah, increased police presence reported on the metro system.
Okay. Which brings us naturally to security. An event like this, the security must be intense.
Oh, it's immense. We're not talking just a few extra officers.
No.
The sources describe thousands of Secret Service and FBI agents brought in from all over the country. Plus, full deployment of MPD, the D.C. Police, and the U.S. Park Police.
So basically every agency that could be involved is involved.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they're using tech, too. Drones overhead for surveillance are mentioned. Gives them that eye in the sky.
It's a massive, multi-layered operation then.
Absolutely.
Top tier.
Though it's worth noting, the officials quoted in the material said, at the time of reporting anyway, there were no specific credible threats against the parade.
So it's more about precaution for an event of this size and visibility.
That's how it's presented. Prudence, given the scale.
Okay. Now, understanding this event, it helps to look back a bit. Military parades themselves. They have a really long history.
They really do, going back thousands of years. Sources mention examples like ancient China, the Roman army using drill not just for fighting, but for show, for discipline.
So it started partly for practical reasons, like keeping soldiers in formation for battle.
Exactly. Close order combat demanded that kind of discipline. But the purpose shifted over time.
How so?
Well, drilling is still fundamental for discipline and pride, right? But modern parades are mostly ceremonial. Sources suggest they're used to, boost morale, show off discipline, project strengths, build public confidence.
And Baron von Steuben gets a mention. from the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, at Valley Forge.
Yeah.
Establishing those drill traditions in the U.S. Army, a key moment for that.
So, ceremonial display. But the sources we read made a point about the U.S. tradition being a bit different.
It's a really interesting point. The material suggests the U.S. has less of a tradition of these big, set-piece national military parades during peacetime.
Less than who?
Compared to countries like France, Russia, China, where you see these huge parades on national holidays pretty regularly.
So while we have ceremonies, this kind of grand parade with tanks and missiles down Pennsylvania Avenue, that's not our usual thing.
Not typically in peacetime, no.
Yeah.
Historically, our really big parades came after major victories.
Like after World War II, the Civil War.
Or the Gulf War in '91, yeah. One historian quoted actually said that displaying major weapons or, tearing up streets with tanks is really rare for the U.S. outside of wartime celebrations.
So in that context, this parade stands out a bit from our usual practice.
It does seem to be presented that way in the sources, yeah. As somewhat exceptional for peacetime.
Which leads us straight into the different views on why this parade is happening now. And the timing. The date itself is significant.
Yeah, that's been unavoidable in the discussion.
Yeah.
The sources highlight this convergence. It is the Army's 250th anniversary, founded in 1775. That's the official reason.
Yeah.
But it's also, exactly, President Trump's 79th birthday, June 14th.
And that coincidence seems to be, fueling a lot of the debate. What's the official purpose stated?
According to the Army Secretary quoted, it's about celebrating Army heritage and, importantly, boosting recruitment.
Okay, recruiting tool.
And the Army Chief of Staff defended it too, said it celebrates the Army, the whole military, showcases equipment, and he pushed back hard on comparing it to, North Korea or the Soviet Union, said that was unfair.
Right, that's the official line. But the sources definitely include critical perspectives on the purpose.
Oh, absolutely. A major viewpoint from critics is that, whatever the stated reason, it ends up looking like an homage to President Trump.
Politicizing the military, is that the concern?
That's the argument presented, yeah. Associating the military displays so closely with the president, especially on his birthday. That timing really amplified the criticism.
Did the president address the birthday link?
He did. Sources say he framed it more around Flag Day, which is also June 14th, not necessarily his birthday celebration.
But not everyone saw it that way.
No. The sources also quote, for instance, a Republican senator who thought it was great celebrating President Trump's birthday and great celebrating the military, so explicitly linking the two.
So really different interpretations of what the event signifies.
Definitely underscores the divide there.
Okay, another huge point of contention. The cost.
Yes.
Yep.
This has drawn a lot of fire. The numbers are big.
Yep.
Estimates range from, $25 million up to $45 million.
I mean, possibly higher.
Some reports could be higher once everything's tallied. These are huge figures.
And how are critics framing that cost, based on what we read?
Pretty strongly. Words like government waste, exorbitant, gross misuse of funds appear in the critiques.
And they often put it next to other government spending issues.
Right. Sources mention context like hiring freezes, staff cuts in some areas, delaying needed maintenance. That comparison gets made.
The argument being the money could be better used elsewhere, maybe even within the military.
Precisely. We saw mention of Democratic senators suggesting funds could go to military families, child care, tuition help, things like that.
Was this criticism just from one side?
Not entirely. The material notes some Republican senators also questioned the cost. So concern about the price tag seemed to cut across party lines to some extent.
Okay, beyond cost, there's this whole discussion about the optics, what it looks like, what message it sends.
Yes, the visual element,
Right.
the imagery, that's been a major focus of debate in the sources.
And the comparisons being drawn are, they're quite pointed.
They are. Descriptions like a martial spectacle reminiscent of the Soviet Union or North Korea, or likening it to displays in Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang.
That's strong language. Does that concern come from different political corners?
It seems so.
Yeah.
We saw that quote from a Republican senator saying he wasn't a fan of goose-stepping soldiers in big tanks, arguing the U.S. tradition was always different.
And there was a point about it looking like the military was turning inward.
Yeah, a political science professor raised that question. Does it look like a politicized military focusing on potentially domestic issues rather than external threats?
And that point gets layered with something else happening around the same time, right? Other military deployments.
Exactly. That context is important. The parade is happening while federal troops are controversially deployed in Los Angeles, National Guard federalized, Marines reportedly sent too in response to protests.
So you have tanks rolling down Constitution Avenue here while troops are deployed domestically there. That's complex optics.
Very complex, and sources say some officials were uncomfortable with that juxtaposition, the fear being it could look like the military was celebrating a domestic crackdown.
Which wasn't the intended message.
Reportedly, definitely not the image Army officials wanted, but the timing created that potential interpretation.
And adding to that, didn't the president make comments about potential protesters here in D.C.?
Yes. Sources cite him warning protesters they'd be met with very heavy force. So all these things, the comparisons, the domestic deployments, the rhetoric, combine to create a really charged atmosphere around the parade's visuals. Given all that debate, purpose, cost, optics, maybe it's no surprise there were protests planned. And public opinion seems split, especially on the money side.
Right. The sources mentioned the No King's Day protests organized by that 5501 movement.
Yeah, reportedly in over 1,500 cities nationwide. Opposing the parade, Trump's policies. Their statement contrasted their people-powered movement with the costly, wasteful, and un-American birthday parade.
But interestingly, mostly outside D.C.
Yeah, the reporting suggested protests were planned everywhere but the Capitol, which maybe lowered the chances of a direct clash near the parade route.
And public opinion on the cost. There was a poll mentioned.
There was. An AP NORC poll found 60% of U.S. adults thought the parade was not a good use of government money.
60%. That suggests the cost concerns really resonated widely.
Seems so. A clear majority questioning the expense.
Okay, one last quick point, how the media covered it. Any notes on that?
Just briefly, the sources noted different approaches. Some major networks apparently streamed it mainly online on their news channels,
While others televised it more broadly.
Yeah, others were mentioned as televising the event itself, integrating it perhaps more into their main broadcast. Varied approaches.
All right, so we've really dug into the material here, unpacked the just incredible scale and complexity of this Army 250th event, the parade, the security.
Layers and layers of security.
And we look back at the history of these kinds of displays.
Right. And then we synthesized all those different perspectives from the sources, the official purpose, versus the criticisms about politics and the birthday link.
Plus the huge debate over the costs, the concerns about the optics.
Those comparisons to other countries, and that really tricky context of the domestic troop deployments happening at the same time. Lots of layers.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, pulling apart all these threads from the information we had. Thanks for joining us.
Always good to unpack these complex stories and the different ways people see them.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on, drawing from everything we found in the sources. Military parades, historically, have done a lot of things, celebrated wins, shown discipline, sometimes they've been propaganda, sometimes about national identity. Considering this specific, huge parade right now, with all the debate around its purpose, cost, and look, what does it signal to you about the military's role today, how we choose to mark national moments, and that ongoing relationship between power, ceremony, and public perception here in the United States?